Have you ever wondered what happens to the soul in those first moments after death? Does everything simply end, or is that the moment when everything truly begins? My dear friends, if you believe that love transcends death, and that our prayers have the power to reach across eternity, write in the comments, "I believe in eternal love." Your words help this message reach more hearts that need to hear this truth. What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you thought you knew about death. These aren't just theories or wishful thinking. These are the mystical revelations of Saint Faustina Kowalska, the apostle of divine mercy, combined with testimonies from people who crossed over and returned to tell us what they witnessed on the other side. Saint Faustina wasn't just any saint. She was chosen by Jesus Christ himself to reveal the depths of divine mercy to our world. Through her extraordinary visions, she was given unprecedented glimpses into what happens to the soul after the heart stops beating. And what she discovered will transform how you view not just death, but how you live every single day of your life. You see, when that final breath leaves the body and the heart grows still, most people believe it's the end of the story. But Saint Faustina reveals something that will astonish you. The soul doesn't disappear. It doesn't simply cease to exist. In fact, it becomes more alive, more conscious, more aware than it has ever been before. This isn't just about what happens after we die. This is about understanding the profound connection between the living and those who have passed on. It's about discovering the incredible power you have right now to affect the eternal destiny of souls through your prayers, your masses, and even your silence during funeral services. What you're about to learn has been hidden from most people. It's knowledge that can change not just how you prepare for your own death, but how you honor and help those who have already made that sacred journey. Saint Faustina shows us that death isn't a wall, it's a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway, something miraculous happens. The saints and mystics throughout history have been given these glimpses of eternity for a reason. Not to satisfy our curiosity, but to transform our hearts. Not to frighten us, but to fill us with hope and purpose. Because when you understand what truly happens after death, you realize that every prayer you say, every mass you offer, every act of love you perform has eternal consequences. Are you ready to discover what science can't measure, but faith reveals? Are you prepared to learn how a single prayer can literally rescue a soul from suffering? Are you willing to understand why the way you behave at funerals can either bring peace or cause pain to souls who are still very much aware of everything happening around them? Then stay with me, because Saint Faustina's revelations are about to show you that death is not the end. It's the beginning of the most important part of our existence. And what happens in those first moments after death will determine where that soul spends eternity. Picture this moment. The heart gives its final beat, the lungs draw their last breath, and medical machines fall silent. To everyone watching, it appears that life has ended. But Saint Faustina reveals something extraordinary. At that precise moment, the soul experiences the most profound awakening of its entire existence. In her mystical visions, Saint Faustina witnessed what happens in those sacred first moments. She describes how a deep silence descends over everything, as if the entire universe holds its breath. Then, in an instant that defies all human understanding, something incredible occurs: the separation. The soul gently lifts away from the body that housed it for decades. But here's what's remarkable: the soul doesn't lose consciousness. Instead, it becomes more aware than it has ever been before. Saint Faustina tells us that the soul looks down at its earthly home with a clarity that's impossible to describe. It recognizes every feature, every line, every mark on that familiar form, but understands with perfect certainty that this vessel is no longer needed. Think about the most vivid dream you've ever had, the kind where everything seems more real than reality itself. Now multiply that clarity by 1,000, and you might begin to understand the heightened awareness that Saint Faustina describes. The soul sees not just with physical sight, but with spiritual vision that penetrates beyond the surface of things. But the soul is not alone in this moment of transition. Saint Faustina reveals that the spiritual realm, normally invisible to us, becomes completely visible to the departing soul. Angels of light approach souls who have lived in God's grace, their presence bringing an indescribable peace and comfort. These heavenly beings serve as escorts, ready to guide the soul on its journey home. However, for souls that have rejected grace during their earthly life, Saint Faustina describes a very different scene. Dark forces also make themselves known, attempting to claim what they believe belongs to them. This isn't about fear-mongering or manipulation. This is about the cosmic battle between good and evil that plays out at the moment of death. What's fascinating is that this first encounter sets the stage for everything that follows. The soul experiences what Saint Faustina calls the first judgment, not the final judgment that comes later, but an immediate recognition of its spiritual state. It's as if scales fall from the soul's eyes, and it sees itself exactly as it truly is, without any of the self-deception or excuses that clouded its vision during earthly life. This moment of recognition can be either beautiful beyond description or terrifying beyond imagination, depending on how the soul lived its life. Those who embraced God's mercy, who tried to love and serve others despite their imperfections, find themselves surrounded by light and peace. But those who hardened their hearts, who chose selfishness and sin over love and service, face the full weight of their choices. Saint Faustina emphasizes something crucial here. This isn't about a vengeful God punishing souls. This is about the natural consequence of the choices we make every single day. Like a plant that either grows toward the light or withers in darkness, our souls shape themselves through our daily decisions, and at the moment of death, that shape is revealed for what it truly is. But here's where Saint Faustina's message becomes incredibly hopeful. Even in that moment of recognition, God's mercy is still available. Divine love doesn't stop flowing just because the heart stops beating. And this is where those of us still living have a role to play that's more important than most people ever realize. Now here's where Saint Faustina's revelations become truly extraordinary, and honestly, a little unsettling for those of us still living. She discovered something that most people never imagine. The soul doesn't immediately depart to its eternal destination. Instead, it remains present during its own funeral service, watching, listening, and feeling everything that happens. Picture walking into a funeral home and knowing that the person everyone came to honor is actually there. Not just as a body lying in the casket, but as a conscious soul, observing every single moment. This isn't science fiction or wishful thinking. This is what Saint Faustina witnessed repeatedly in her mystical experiences. The soul sees who enters the room with genuine grief and who shows up merely out of obligation. It recognizes those who truly loved them and those who are just going through the motions. But more than seeing, Saint Faustina tells us that the soul feels everything on a level we can barely comprehend. When someone approaches the casket with real love, real sorrow, real faith, the soul experiences that emotion like waves of warm light washing over it. A mother weeping genuinely for her child, a spouse remembering beautiful memories with authentic tenderness, a friend offering a heartfelt prayer. These moments bring indescribable comfort to the soul that's watching. But here's what might shock you. The soul also feels the coldness, the indifference, the shallow conversations happening just feet away from its earthly remains. When people use the funeral as a social gathering, chatting about work, sportsmen, or gossip while pretending to pay respects, the soul experiences this as a form of spiritual pain. Saint Faustina describes how painful it is for a soul to witness people making jokes, checking their phones, or speaking critically about the deceased during what should be a sacred time of prayer and remembrance. It's like being unable to speak while watching people disrespect everything you held dear. The mystic Maria Sima, whose experiences align perfectly with Saint Faustina's revelations, received a message from souls that's both simple and profound. You would have done us a much greater favor if you had kept quiet and prayed one, Our Father, instead of all those empty compliments. Think about that for a moment. All those flowery eulogies, all those elaborate speeches about how wonderful someone was, if they're not backed by genuine love and prayer, they mean absolutely nothing to the soul that's listening. In fact, they can feel hollow and even hurtful when the soul can perceive the speaker's true motivations. But here's where it gets beautiful. When someone at the funeral bows their head and offers a simple, sincere prayer, even just a quick, Lord, have mercy on their soul, Saint Faustina describes it as a ray of pure light that cuts through any darkness surrounding the deceased. That one genuine prayer carries more weight than a dozen flowery speeches delivered without faith. The soul recognizes authentic grief, authentic love, and authentic prayer, because in its heightened spiritual state, it can see straight into people's hearts. There's no fooling a soul that's been freed from the limitations of physical perception. It sees motivations, intentions, and the depth of feeling behind every word and gesture. What's particularly moving is how the soul responds to children at funerals. Saint Faustina noted that when innocent children pray, even with simple words they learned in Sunday school, their prayers shine like diamonds. When a grandchild whispers, "Grandma, I love you," with pure, uncomplicated affection, the soul receives that love like a direct gift from heaven. This understanding should transform how we approach every funeral we attend. We're not just honoring a memory or comforting the living, we're participating in a sacred moment where the boundary between earth and eternity becomes thin. The soul of our loved one is there with us, aware of our every word, our every prayer, our every genuine expression of love. But the most powerful revelation is yet to come. Saint Faustina discovered that during these funeral services, there's a spiritual battle taking place that most people never recognize. And the outcome of that battle can be influenced by something as simple as a single prayer offered with faith. What I'm about to share with you might be the most important thing you ever learn about helping those who have passed away. Saint Faustina discovered that prayer isn't just a nice gesture we offer for the dead. It's literally a lifeline that can rescue souls from suffering and open the gates of heaven itself. Let me tell you about one of the most powerful encounters Saint Faustina recorded in her diary. She was praying in her convent chapel when suddenly she became aware of a soul in desperate need. This wasn't someone she knew personally, but a soul that was crying out for help from what we call purgatory, that state of purification before entering heaven. The soul appeared to her in great distress, pleading for prayers and masses. Saint Faustina's heart was moved with compassion, and she immediately offered a holy mass for this suffering soul. Now, what happened next will astonish you. Just days later, that same soul appeared to Saint Faustina again. But this time everything was different. The soul was radiant, surrounded by indescribable light, filled with peace and joy. With a voice overflowing with gratitude, the soul said, "God's light enveloped me because of the Mass you offered for me." One Mass. One single Mass had the power to liberate a soul from purification and usher it into the eternal bliss of heaven. This isn't just beautiful theology. This is the practical reality of how our prayers can literally change someone's eternal destiny. But why is the Mass so powerful? Saint Faustina explains that during the Eucharist, something happens that most people don't fully grasp. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ on Calvary becomes present again, not as a memory, not as a symbol, but as a living reality that transcends time and space. When we offer a Mass for someone who has died, we're placing their soul directly into the healing light of Christ's infinite mercy. Think about this for a moment. While we're worried about sending flowers or writing the perfect sympathy card, Saint Faustina is telling us that there's something infinitely more valuable we can give to someone we love who has passed away. We can give them a Mass. We can literally purchase their freedom from suffering through this one perfect prayer. A woman in Texas shared an incredible testimony that perfectly illustrates this truth. Her father had died suddenly without receiving the last sacraments, and she was tormented by worry about his soul. Following Saint Faustina's example, she had 30 masses offered for him over the course of a month. On the 30th day, she had a dream where her father appeared to her, looking younger and more peaceful than she had seen him in years. He simply said, "Thank you for the masses. I'm home now." She never doubted again that her prayers had made all the difference, but it's not just Mass that has this power. Saint Faustina discovered that any prayer offered with genuine faith and love creates what she describes as rays of light that penetrate directly into the spiritual realm. A simple Our Father, prayed with real intention for a departed soul, can provide relief from suffering. A heartfelt Hail Mary can attract the attention and intercession of the Blessed Mother herself. The key is sincerity. God isn't impressed by fancy words or lengthy prayers. He's moved by the love behind the prayer. When a child prays, "God, please take care of my grandpa," that simple petition carries enormous power because it comes from a pure heart. Saint Faustina also reveals something that should encourage all of us. She learned that God often applies the grace from our prayers, not just to the soul we're praying for, but to other souls in need as well. When you pray for your departed grandmother, you might also be helping souls who have no one left on earth to pray for them. Your single prayer becomes part of a spiritual network of mercy that reaches souls across the world. There's something else St. Faustina discovered that will change how you think about helping the deceased. The souls in purgatory, once they reach heaven, don't forget who helped them during their time of need. They become powerful intercessors for those who showed them mercy through prayer. When you help a soul through your masses and prayers, you gain an advocate in heaven who will pray for you and your family for all eternity. This is why the saints tell us that praying for the dead is one of the most beautiful investments we can make. We're not just helping them, we're building up spiritual treasures for ourselves and our loved ones. Now we come to one of the most profound revelations that St. Faustina received, one that's been confirmed by other great mystics throughout church history, including St. Bridget of Sweden. After the soul separates from the body and experiences that initial moment of recognition, it doesn't immediately proceed to its final destination. Instead, it embarks on what can only be described as a sacred pilgrimage through 3 specific places that shaped its earthly existence. This isn't a physical journey, of course. The soul moves through these locations in a spiritual dimension where time and space work differently than they do in our world. But the experiences are absolutely real and profoundly meaningful for the soul's purification and understanding. The first place the angels guide the soul to visit is where it committed sins. Now, this doesn't mean just the big, obvious sins that we usually think about. St. Faustina learned that the soul revisits every place where it turned away from God's love, including moments of selfishness, unkindness, missed opportunities to help others, and times when it chose its own will over God's will. A nurse from Chicago who had a near-death experience described exactly what St. Faustina revealed. She found herself standing in her childhood home, watching herself as a teenager, encouraging her best friend to cheat on an important exam. "I saw how that one moment of bad influence rippled out through my friend's life," she said. "I watched her lose her scholarship, change schools, and start down a path of dishonesty that took years to overcome. I felt the weight of my responsibility in that moment." But here's what's remarkable. The soul doesn't experience condemnation during these visits. Instead, it experiences perfect understanding. It sees the truth of its actions without the self-deception or excuses that clouded its judgment during earthly life. There's sorrow, yes, but also a profound recognition of God's mercy that was available even in those moments of failure. The second place the soul visits is where it loved and practiced goodness, and this is where St. Faustina's revelations become absolutely beautiful. All those small acts of kindness that seemed insignificant during life suddenly shine like precious jewels in the spiritual realm. The soul might find itself back in a grocery store checkout line where it let an elderly person go ahead. It might revisit a moment when it comforted a crying child or offered a sincere compliment to someone who was struggling with self-doubt. These moments, forgotten or dismissed as unimportant during earthly life, become sources of incredible joy and light for the soul. What's amazing is how the soul realizes that God noticed every single act of love, no matter how small. That time you held the door for a stranger, that moment you listened patiently to someone's problems, that quiet prayer you offered for someone in need, all of it was recorded in heaven and becomes a source of celebration for the soul. A businessman who survived a massive heart attack described visiting the moment when he anonymously paid for a struggling family's groceries during the recession. "I had completely forgotten about it," he said. But there in that spiritual state, I could see how that act of kindness prevented that family from losing their home. The ripple effects of one moment of generosity were beyond anything I could have imagined. The third and most touching place the soul visits is where someone is praying for it. This might be the most beautiful revelation of all. The soul is drawn to locations where people are lifting it up in prayer. Perhaps a church where its name is mentioned during Mass, a bedside where a grandchild whispers a simple prayer, or a kitchen table where an old friend lights a candle and offers a heartfelt petition for the soul's peace. St. Faustina describes how the soul feels these prayers as waves of divine love and mercy. When someone prays for the deceased, the soul experiences it as if heaven itself is bending down to embrace it. The geographical distance doesn't matter. A prayer offered in New York for someone who died in California reaches that soul instantly and provides immediate comfort and assistance. This is why the communion of saints is so real and so powerful. The barriers between earth and eternity become permeable through prayer. When you pray for someone who has died, you're not just hoping your words reach them somehow. You're participating in a divine network that transcends physical reality. Understanding this should transform how we think about death and mourning. Our loved ones aren't gone. They're experiencing the truth of their lives in a way that's more complete than anything they knew while living. And through our prayers, we remain connected to them in the most meaningful way possible. What Saint Faustina discovered next might completely change how you view funeral services forever. While family and friends gather to pay their respects, while flowers are arranged and eulogies are prepared, there's an invisible war being fought right there in that funeral home or church. It's a battle between light and darkness, between forces that want to help the soul and forces that want to harm it. Picture the scene. Mourners filing past the casket, some wiping away tears, others chatting quietly in the back rows. To our physical eyes, it looks like any other gathering of people. But Saint Faustina reveals that the spiritual realm is intensely active during these moments, with angels and demons fully engaged in a struggle for influence. The angels of God are there, surrounding the soul with protection and comfort, ready to carry every sincere prayer straight to the throne of heaven. They're like spiritual bodyguards, but instead of protecting the body, they're safeguarding the soul's journey and amplifying every act of genuine love and faith offered by the mourners. But the forces of darkness are present too, and their strategy is both subtle and devastating. They don't need to create dramatic disruptions or obvious evil. Instead, they work through distraction, indifference, and superficiality. Every time someone pulls out their phone to check social media during the service, every casual conversation about weekend plans, every moment when people treat the funeral like a social event rather than a sacred opportunity, these create spiritual static that interferes with the flow of grace to the soul. Think about the last funeral you attended. Were there moments when people seemed more focused on catching up with relatives they hadn't seen in years than on praying for the deceased? Were there whispered conversations about work, gossip about family drama, or complaints about the weather? Saint Faustina shows us that these aren't just minor distractions. They're spiritual obstacles that can actually hinder the soul's progress toward peace. When someone offers a genuine prayer during the funeral service, Saint Faustina describes it as a brilliant ray of light that cuts through any darkness surrounding the soul. But when people engage in meaningless chatter or show disrespect, it creates what she calls spiritual fog that makes it harder for the soul to receive the graces being offered. The most heartbreaking part is when people use the funeral as an opportunity to judge or criticize the deceased. Comments like, "Well, he wasn't perfect," or "she could be difficult sometimes," might seem harmless to us. But Saint Faustina reveals that souls who are still undergoing purification feel these words like physical blows. They're aware, they're listening, and they're vulnerable to the spiritual atmosphere being created around them. But here's where we have incredible power to make a difference. Every time someone chooses to pray instead of gossip, every moment of respectful silence, every genuine expression of love and mercy creates a fortress of grace around the soul. When multiple people unite in sincere prayer during a funeral service, Saint Faustina says the combined spiritual light becomes so brilliant that it can literally lift souls out of purification and into heaven. This is why the Church has always emphasized the importance of treating funerals as sacred liturgies, rather than merely social gatherings. It's not about being somber or joyless. It's about recognizing that we're participating in something that has eternal consequences for someone we love. The next time you attend a funeral, remember that you're not just there to comfort the living. You're there as a spiritual warrior, armed with the power of prayer, capable of influencing the eternal destiny of the soul being honored. Now we come to perhaps the most beautiful and hope-filled revelation that Saint Faustina received: the role of the Blessed Virgin Mary in those final moments of life and the early stages of death. What she discovered about Our Lady's presence during this sacred transition will fill your heart with incredible hope and transform how you think about praying the rosary for yourself and your loved ones. Saint Faustina learned that in those critical final moments before death, when the soul is most vulnerable and the spiritual battle is most intense, the Mother of God often appears to offer one last chance at mercy and salvation. This isn't just for saints or extraordinarily holy people. It's for ordinary souls who may have lived imperfect lives but had some connection, however small, to Mary's maternal love. Let me share with you a testimony that perfectly illustrates this truth. A young woman from Louisiana, raised in a non-religious household, found herself in a coma after a severe car accident. During those critical hours when doctors weren't sure she would survive, she experienced something that changed her life forever. She found herself in what seemed like a dark tunnel, surrounded by frightening presences that filled her with terror. She had no religious training, no knowledge of how to pray, and felt completely helpless. But then, she said, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen appeared beside me. She was wearing a blue cloak that seemed to glow with its own light. And when she looked at me, I felt love unlike anything I had ever experienced. This mysterious woman took her hand and wrapped her in the blue cloak, instantly protecting her from the dark forces that had been threatening her. The young woman woke up in the hospital 3 days later, and when a nurse showed her a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe on her badge, she immediately recognized her rescuer. That's her. That's the woman who saved me. What makes this story even more remarkable is what the young woman discovered later. Her grandmother, who had died when she was very young, had been a devout Catholic who prayed the rosary every single day for her family, including her granddaughter, who seemed to have no interest in faith. Those prayers, offered faithfully year after year, created a spiritual lifeline that reached across time to save a soul in its moment of greatest need. Saint Faustina confirms this truth, that even one sincere Hail Mary, prayed with genuine devotion, can attract the attention and protection of the Queen of Heaven during life's most critical moments. She doesn't require perfect faith or complete understanding. She responds to love, however imperfect, and to the prayers of faithful people who intercede for others. But Mary's intervention doesn't stop at the moment of death. Saint Faustina also witnessed how the Blessed Mother continues to advocate for souls during their purification process. When someone dies with devotion to Mary, even if their life wasn't perfect, she becomes their advocate before her Son, constantly pleading for mercy and offering her own merits to help speed their journey to heaven. This is why the Church has always encouraged devotion to Mary as a preparation for a happy death. When you pray the Rosary regularly, when you wear her scapular, when you consecrate yourself to her Immaculate Heart, you're not just performing religious exercises, you're establishing a relationship with someone who has the power to intercede for you in your moment of greatest need. Think about this. The same woman who stood at the foot of the cross watching her Son die for our sins is the one who appears to help us in our final moments. The same maternal heart that pondered all things and treasured them is the one that remembers every prayer offered to her and every act of devotion, no matter how small. Saint Faustina learned that Mary particularly helped souls who showed kindness to others during their earthly life. If you lived with compassion, if you tried to help those in need, if you offered comfort to the suffering, the Mother of Mercy remembers these acts and responds with her own maternal care when your time comes. My dear friends, the revelations of Saint Faustina have shown us something extraordinary. Death is not an ending, but a transformation. The soul continues its journey, aware and conscious, experiencing the truth of how it lived and feeling every prayer offered on its behalf. Every Mass you have celebrated for a departed loved one, every rosary you've prayed, every moment of genuine grief and love you've offered at a funeral, all of it matters. All of it reaches across the veil between earth and eternity to bring comfort, healing and hope to souls who need your help. But this knowledge comes with responsibility. Now that you understand the power you have to help those who have passed on, you can't go back to treating funerals as merely social events. You can't ignore the spiritual battle happening around you when you're in the presence of grief and loss. Starting today, make a commitment. Pray for the souls who have no one left to pray for them. Offer masses for your departed loved ones. When you attend funerals, go as a prayer warrior, not just as a mourner. And remember, someday, you'll be the one depending on the prayers of those you leave behind. If this message has touched your heart and opened your eyes to the reality of life after death, write Eternal Mercy in the comments. Your words help this truth reach other hearts that need to hear it. Share this with someone you love. Together, we can create a network of prayer that spans from earth to heaven, bringing light to souls and hope to the living. Because when we truly understand what Saint Faustina revealed about the journey of the soul after death, we realize that love never dies. It just transforms. And through our prayers, our masses, and our acts of mercy, we remain forever connected to those who have gone before us, helping them reach their eternal home while they intercede for us from heaven. This is the beautiful truth of the communion of saints. This is the power of divine mercy, and this is the hope that Saint Faustina wanted to share with the world, that death is not the end, but the beginning of our truest life.